Evil is evil, evil Stregobor. Less, greater, middling. It's all the same. I'm not judging you. I haven't only done good in my life either. But now, if I have to choose between one evil and another, then I prefer not to choose at all. I'm Chris Spivey.
And I'm Eddie Webb.
And today we talk about the greatest video game ever wait a second, we're talking about the TV series, The Witcher. I was torn for quotes, Eddie. I went with the one here, but I almost went with the song Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, and it was going to sing the entire thing.
I know.
But then I remembered I drink so much coffee in the morning that probably by the third lyric, I would like have a little cough and then I have to redo it. And Eddie would get frustrated because then I do like 30 takes and he's like, I'm not your producer.
I would just walk away and eventually get it right. I do have to say, before we discuss this show at all, as soon as I started watching it, I immediately fell in a rabbit hole of listening to a whole bunch of covers of Cost According to Your Witcher, just like I did in 2019.
Because it is a strangely addictive song.
So addictive.
Joey Bartlett, who plays Yosker in the series, did a great version, but then everyone came out with phenomenal other versions of it.
Yeah, there's like a speed metal version, a vaporwave version, a torch singer version, and they're all just really good. It was for me discovering that there's this whole category of YouTubers who are just fantastic musicians, and then of course 2020 hit, and you saw even more of those people who were finding ways to do music on YouTube. But it was just like, oh my god, these people are so good.
All right, so this is totally not at all related to The Witcher, but I discovered it last night. So a point of reference to everyone. I know that you're all likely surprised, but I watched all 3 of these episodes less than 14 hours ago.
Behold my shock.
So think about that as each episode's about an hour. Then I have to write up a synopsis for it. And now I'm podcasting about it. Less than 14 hours. This is what I do with my time. But anyway, instead of watching the show, I was on Instagram and I stumbled over Ken Marino. Do you know Ken Marino is? He was a member of the State, and he was also the crappy PI in the Veronica Mars TV series. He's a comedian, part of that crew.
Veronica Mars.
He was the 2-bit sleazy, dark-haired private eye that they were always going up against.
If I haven't seen it, so I'm sure it's probably like, as soon as I look him up, I go, oh yeah, that guy.
Anyway, he started a dad's garage band called Dad Band Jam Rock or something, and it is phenomenally weird. And I found myself on YouTube watching like some of their videos last night because it's a whole band and they're singing songs. They've got Kristen Bell that popped up on there, and they've got some other people that he's brought some of his friends in from the State for some of their things. It was
wow,
and he has a decent voice, better than I thought, and it was what I discovered last night with people making YouTube music, and there it is.
Speaking of weird bands, have you ever heard of Cybertronic Spree?
Not unless that's the band that dresses up like Autobots and plays music.
Yes, it is in fact Autobots and Decepticons. But yes, they dress up as Transformers, and they start off as cover bands for Stan Bush stuff from things, but they've just put out their own album, and they're again surprisingly good for people who dress up as cardboard Autobots.
Are they good because they in fact had the touch?
You got the touch.
We can't sing it because Mike's not here.
Right.
We can only sing it if Mike's here.
That's true. It's true.
So I'm putting it out. If Mike actually listens to the podcast, he needs to come back just so we can all sing that song together.
Well, I think Mike's too busy
style.
Working with CD Projekt Reds, who also make the Witcher video games. Hey, look, there we are.
Look at that nice transition back. I'm amazed, Eddie, how you were able to transform that into a segue.
God damn it, I just got here. Great Dragon is back.
Because I'm a Decepticon and evil.
Ruiner of segues.
No. So, The Witcher. Okay. I saw The Witcher when it first came out. Because I played the Witcher video games. The first video game Wow. How much of the story do I want to tell? So when I was originally deployed to Iraq, one of the things that someone told me is that there's going to be a lot of downtime. You're going to be bored, and then you'll be excited, then you'll be bored.
Hmm.
And so they're like, get a computer. And growing up, I was too poor to be able to have a computer. That's why I play a lot of like Nintendo and stuff like that, because they were cheaper to buy. So that's why I'm better with a handhold than the console. Still to this day. So as a side note to geek parents, if you want your kids to be great at laptop computer games, buy them a fucking laptop now so they can learn on that and not a console.
Right.
Done. That's my the more you know Joe moment of the podcast.
Doo-doo-doo-doo.
Anyway, one of the 3 games I bought before I deployed to Iraq was The Witcher. It was the first Witcher game.
Hmm.
And I loaded up and I had a chance to play a little bit of it. And so it was not a great game, but it was an interesting world because some of the mechanics in the game didn't work right. And as I said, as a console player, I couldn't push the buttons right. But moved to Witcher 2, which came out sometime later. It was a great game. And Witcher 3 is probably one of the greatest open world games to be made to this date.
Hmm.
Seconded only by Red Dead Redemption 2. But because the mechanics in The Witcher 3 are amazing, the world building's amazing. I think there is a lot of controversy about maybe how many they push their workers to make that incredible game. That I don't remember.
Yes. Yes.
But it's phenomenal.
Uh, my experience is kind of similar to yours. Although it's, in my case, it wasn't the boredom of Iraq; it was the boredom of waiting for levels to render. Because I was working at CCP, um, I had a lot of random downtime in my job, and one of my people on my team has started playing the first Witcher game. I was like, "Yeah, I'll play this game." I was like, "I'm not really into fantasy games." No, you have to check this out. So I bought it off Steam, started playing it, and I got really far into that game. I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool," but it's a bit janky. The controls are not great, um, especially the combat is just so. Yeah, I played it again recently. I was like, "Oh my god, how did I survive playing this game for so long?" Um, and so I got two pretty quickly. Found a bug in the tutorial that I couldn't progress
Oh.
past, so I said, "Well, screw it. I'm not playing this game ever again." And then eventually someone's like, "No, you have to play 3." And I'm like, "I don't really want to play 3. It's 2 was not great." It's like, "No, you have to try play 3." So I played 3, and I enjoyed that for a while. Um, but then by the time I started playing 3 is when Cyberpunk 2077 came out, and I was like, "Well, I'm done with that." I'll play Cyberpunk instead. Uh,
Well, that was pretty. You started a lot later than I did. I played Witcher 3 directly when it came out, so there was something else like it.
yeah, no, mine was way later. But like you, I watched The Witcher more or less when it first came out, and for similar reasons. It was I remember playing the games. This will be cool. And in my head, I was like, oh, it's a video game adaptation. I kind of knew they were based on novels, but that was like knowledge that was deep in the back of my head. Um, although after I watched the first season, I then went back and started reading the novels because friends had recommended them to me. And as I've said before in the podcast, I'm not someone who reads a ton of fantasy, but I did enjoy the first couple Witcher books. But then 2020 hit, and I was not really in the mood to read grimdark anything for a while, so I kind of fell off. I've been meaning to actually kind of go back and read them. But yeah, so I have kind of a weird a relationship with The Witcher in the sense that I have. There's a lot of it. I know the front end of a lot of Witcher stuff. I've even read some of the comics because there was a great bundle a while back of a bunch of Witcher comics. So I read a bunch of Witcher comics, and I can't tell you a fucking thing about them. They fell right out of my head. They were. I remember enjoying them, but I don't remember anything about them.
Because I knew they're based on like 15 short stories and 8 books, I think. I've never read any of them. I own 4 of the books because I bought them. It's like, all right, I'm going to read them. I love the video game. And I have a very large to read pile
Yeah, same.
that grows exponentially every other day because I spend most of my actual free time reading for research reading instead of
Right,
fun reading.
right. I will say that I think part of the reason why I like them is they reminded me a lot of the Robert E. Howard fantasy we talked about, in the sense that
Yep.
they're short stories that initially were kind of a bit out of order, although when they were translated and republished, they were reorganized into chronological order. But originally, they were kind of just different parts of the Witcher story, and it was kind of just here's the monster of the week, and here's the twist. Uh, so definitely fits in that kind of timeline. So we started with Conan, and it definitely there's a strong thematic connection there. But also there's a bit of a fairy tale quality to the stories that the show doesn't quite hit the same way.
Hmm. I could see that. I know there's a lot of controversy around how the show itself does its first season.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, hmm, the casting that you see here, since you've read the book and played some of the games, is that what they looked like in your mind's eye?
Uh, kind of. I think part of the problem for me is that since I played the games first, that's kind of how I saw the characters when I read the books. So
Yeah.
there's no real divorcing that. And I'm sadly one of those readers that like the book would tell me this person was like this. It's like cool, whatever. 2 pages later, that has fallen out of my head, and whatever I think imagine them as is now true. And so occasionally they'll like reference their hair color again or something. I say, wait, there. Oh wait, no, yes. Objectively, that is the correct hair color, but that's not what my head Ken has told me. So sometimes things like that will happen. So I'm bad about that. And I feel like uh, they made some interesting. The Witcher himself is great. I think Cavill did a great job, but he's also a huge fan of the game, so that's not a surprise. Um, Other choices of characters are a bit different from the video game, and uh, in some cases I have warmed to them, in other cases I haven't. Part of the problem I have with The Witcher as a whole, uh, you know what? I could do a big long intellectual spiel about it. Basically, comes down to Yennefer. I have serious problems with Yennefer as a concept, not as a character, just how she's treated.
All right. Now I'm interested. So, can you give us is this going to come out when we discuss the episodes, or is this something we should do at the top of the show?
No, I mean, let's talk about it now. Because that's what you've done from your perspective of things. So I'm kind of in the same boat here. Um, Yennefer is ultimately a really, really, really bad ableism allegory. It's the if you're disabled, but if you were just made beautiful and perfect, your life would be so much better. And the stories kind of go into that, but because Yennefer's much more compressed story, it's over and done with. It's like that's gross, but whatever. But The Witcher stretches that out, and so it becomes much more of a thing. And then on top of it, it's the um, you would be so much better if you also could be a mother, but you can't. So it's a double thing of like, uh, uh, you would be so much you would be so much better as a disabled person if you were beautiful and able and also could have kids. Because we don't want you to have kids if you're disabled. We want you to have kids only if you're abled. And it's just like, so there's a lot about how that's written, and then the show just keeps. And at first I was like, okay, we'll get past it, and then they'll drop it, and they don't. It just keeps fucking coming up. Because frequently it'd be like, she'll do evil Yennefer stuff, and someone will say, "Yeah, but she used to be crooked and crippled." And it's just like, why? Why the fuck do we keep going back to this well?
Huh. So, all right. As I've already said, I haven't read the book, so I don't have that point of reference. One of the things I do know for some of the reviews that came out about the show is people were upset about and I'm not saying this is you, but I'm saying what these people said, the
Yep.
expanded role of Yennefer and how they created all of that for her because it's not in the books. And they had a similar thing for Ciri because most of those characters' arcs revolve around Geralt actively being a part of them.
Mm-hmm.
Which having read some of those and hearing your take and knowing that Cavill leaves the show, from my understanding,
Mm-hmm.
because it begins to deviate so much away from the original text that he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like, from my
Yeah.
understanding, Cavill had his agent call them every day to tell them that he was interested in the show. He had all this stuff to get onto the show. And then they used him for the first season as a resource for his knowledge of the books.
Right.
But then they wanted to tell their own stories about Yennefer and them becoming a family. And that's why the entire underwriting thing, even throughout these episodes, is that she becomes obsessed with regaining her ability to have a kid, and Ciri becomes her kid, quote,
Right.
essentially. And the person that led the show, was all about making them a family of some kind. Like all of them are orphans, but now they're together as a family.
Right.
So I
And
don't know if that's in the books, and I don't think that's not so much in the game, because more in the game, Geralt, because the game can choose which way you go, but Geralt kind of becomes a father figure, but not like a father, if you understand what I'm saying.
right. Yeah. So I've only read the first couple of books. And very loosely, it's a bit like Game of Thrones. The first novel covers the first season, the second novel covers the second season. But unlike Game of Thrones, they deviate pretty fast out of the gates. Because again, the thing is that the shows are short stories. It's the technical term is a braided novel. For those who don't know, braided novels are short stories that actually do have connectivity between them, but they're still relatively isolated incidents. So it's not serialized in the sense of thing, but it's like characters that were in previous short stories may appear in later short stories, or things that the main character learned in previous short stories may have relevance in later short stories. That's what's called a braided novel. And so the first one is very much like that. And again, they're originally written to be just for magazines and whatnot. And then they were compiled together and rewritten to kind of give a little more connectivity between them. So I was surprised because that seems like such a natural television order.
Yeah.
Incident, and then, oh, all these incidents are actually tying together. Instead, they did that with Gerald, but then they had this entire, like you said, Yennefer and other and Ciri undercurrents to kind of tie the whole season together, and they're all in wildly different time frames, right? Like Ciri's story takes place over the course of 2 weeks. Yennefer's story takes place over the course of 70 years. And they're all
Yeah.
being cut in between, and it's not at all clear there are time differences.
And I think that was part of their original showrunner's intent, was to do that because they wanted to amplify both Yennefer and Ciri's piece of the story and focus more on Yennefer. Because if you watch the show, it's more of a Yennefer. It becomes more of a Yennefer show with Geralt and Ciri as her sidekicks.
Right.
And I guess this segues me into a less fun part of the conversation, is that this show also had Beau DeMayo as part of it.
Okay.
And Beau DeMayo was from the X-Men, and I think Beau DeMayo was also fired from The Witcher.
Okay.
But I think part of Beau DeMayo's, this is me vaguely remembering stuff, so you take this at 30% accuracy at best. But Beau DeMayo and Henry Cavill were pushing to keep closer to the text itself that they were working from, and that didn't jive with where the direction they wanted to go with the show. And then it
Here's
became a whole spin thing of controversy and articles and everything else, which I can't speak to. But I can
there's
only
no,
speak to the fact that Cavill said he wanted to stay for 7 seasons if it stayed true to the books.
Yep. Right. Another wrinkle in all of this is I mentioned CD Projekt. Um, uh, so CD Projekt has all of the video game rights to The Witcher, and it's not a license. They have just straight up they bought the rights from the writer who's Sapkowski. His first name I believe is pronounced Andrzej, but we'll say Sapkowski. He sold the rights to CD Projekt for video game rights and some attended ancillary rights. Uh, so, as I understand it, Netflix did not license The Witcher from Sapkowski. They licensed The Witcher from CD Projekt Red.
See, I thought they licensed it from him because he was brought on supposedly as a creative consultant, which he then says, I am not a creative consultant for this show. But
Right.
then it came out later that I forgot her name. His last name is Hiss, I think, said that he is part of the creative team for the first season.
Right, because I believe that was an olive branch, but the reason why they were able to deviate so far from it is because Sapkowski later out said, if I had my way, they would just adapt the books. They were able to marginalize him, and therefore other people wanted to adapt closer to the books because they were actually adapting it from the video game side.
But then All right.
Okay,
That's a whole other conversation that I don't think we
it
can
gets
get
even
into.
better because before all of this, Sapkowski filed a lawsuit against CD Projekt Red in 2018 because he said he was demanded $16 million in royalty payments, and but it was pointed out that he doesn't get royalties because he sold the rights, and then it was settled out of court, and then he was put on the creative team for Netflix. Now,
I
legally,
think it goes back.
no one's allowed to reveal what the resolution was, but there's a pretty straight line between those points.
And part of it, I think, goes back to something that the great Alan Moore said, who's Eddie's favorite writer, is that you make the deal that you can at the time.
Right.
And Sir, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I won't butcher his name. How I'm going to butcher everyone's name in the show in a minute.
Yeah.
We'll say AS, the writer. Look at that.
Sure.
Got around it. That's Alabama education for you folks.
Yes.
AS. I think was a fur trader, if I remember reading some of his bio right, and started publishing the books in 85 and 86.
Mm.
So transition to about the 2000s, where there was another series that came out before this in a movie called The Hexer
Mm-hmm.
in Poland. Didn't have we'll say the clout to be able to probably make the deals that he wanted to make. And now that it's gotten more popularity, he's probably trying to go back and get the money that he's owed, but it's too late because, as I've said multiple times on the podcast, companies are not your friends.
Right. And let's be honest, there is no way in the 90s or early 2000s that anyone would have thought, this Polish fantasy series has become an international phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
And as much as I do not like to defend companies, I will have to say CD Projekt's argument during the lawsuit was The Witcher would not have become popular if it wasn't for the video games. And I think that is just objectively true. A lot of the reasons why the books have been translated into so many languages and then sent back out is because people wanted to find the original source material from the video games or from the TV show. And now they sell crazy. And I think part of the argument is that Sapkowski still has the rights to obviously all the translations, so he's getting that money from them. But his argument is the Netflix and the video games are making so much more than bookstore novels, and he should be getting a cut of that. I agree with him, but you're right. You make the deal you can at the time, and there was just no way anyone could have possibly have predicted this kind of success. So we lead into when you have someone who not only does not understand television or video games, but also, let's be honest, doesn't speak the common language of the production team, he's going to get frozen out. And so normally having someone like Bodemeo, like Cavill, who's defendant of the material, should help that. We saw that during our Sherlock Holmes run, where the lead actor would be like, let's really focus on the core material as much as possible. But for whatever reason, the Netflix team decided to go a different direction. And I feel that ultimately the show has suffered because of it.
I 100% agree. It's also why Cavill leaves at season 3, and they're bringing in Liam Hemsworth, Thor's brother, to take over the role from Cavill, I think. And they've already said it's going to run for 2 more seasons, and season 5 is the last thing.
Yes, I saw that.
But the thing is, first season, I think, had some good ratings, but like very mixed reviews, which gave them a second season, which gave them an opportunity. And second season was somewhat well received, but then it totally dropped the ball after that. And second season also was impacted by COVID.
Yep.
Whole other things. And for people that are watching second season, if you're enjoying it, just remember that there was a campaign to have Mark Hamill be Vesemir, who is Geralt's teacher. And they went away.
That'd be great. But also, I mean, let's talk about the elephant in the room here. The Witcher was absolutely Netflix going, we want our own Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
And watching this show, if you know that, it's really hard not to see them trying to HBOify as anywhere they can. They looked at Game of Thrones. got a certain number of lessons out of it, tried to apply it to The Witcher, and arguably get mixed results. And I have thoughts as we go through the episodes about sometimes that works, but a lot of times it didn't. And The Witcher is already pretty adult material, so I mean, it's from a tonal standpoint, it's not that far away from Game of Thrones. I can see why they picked it, but unlike having someone like George R. R. Martin on board, who was a little more at least aggressive, and HBO was a little less confident, so I think he had a little more say. It was talked before, he had some more say in early seasons, and kind of seemed like his influence diminished over later seasons. I feel like out of the gate, Netflix is like, no, we know what we're doing. Basically, just take this material and copy and paste Game of Thrones. Oh, Game of Thrones has braided ongoing storylines. We need to have one of those, and we need to be constantly shifting between characters, and it needs to be going between different viewpoints and different timelines. So that's all things we need to do with this, even though the stories don't necessarily support that change.
You're right. And that's why first season, I think, got as many negative reviews as it did, because it was so unfocused and felt scattershot.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that, once again, she did it so that she could bring the other two characters to prominence also. And the other two aren't really brought to prominence. Yennefer's brought to prominence because Ciri is sort of tacked in at the end of a lot of episodes. Ciri runs through the woods. Ciri does this one little beat.
Yeah, I guess since we're kind of here, I will say that the original novels don't have a ton of prominent female characters, so I can see the instinct of let's make some more prominent characters and give them more screen time. But you're right, it's very clear they had a character they liked and a character they didn't. You know.
So, anything else before we should just probably, get into it?
Let's see. We talked
Do
about
we want to
video
talk about the
games,
Superman of the whole thing?
the Superman of the whole thing. What do you mean the Superman of the whole thing?
Because so when Cavill was leaving, part of the reasons that people were trying to say is that because he was going off to be Superman again. And
Oh,
that wasn't true, because Cavill stressed that regardless if it stayed true, he wanted to do The Witcher. Like, he felt this is a character that let him show his real skill sets.
right.
And he was pushing to have Geralt here be closer to Geralt in the books, where he was a lot more loquacious, from my
Mhm.
understanding, and just not,
Yeah,
Joxer, Yennefer, Roach.
right. Um, I will say I think his recent involvement with the Warhammer TV project and the fact that he is on the creative team of that probably stems from this experience.
Yes.
Because
Although I'm looking forward to seeing Henry Cavill as Connor McLeod if he gets to be Connor McLeod.
oh, is he mooted for the Highlander reboot?
I've read so many rumors about that thing. The last one I read says that Cavill is supposed to be McLeod, but that could be wrong. I lose track these days.
The rumor I've heard that I'm excited about, if it's true, is Cavill might be Bond.
I know that he'd be excited, because that's why, I think we mentioned it before, that's why he went off and became the Henry Cavill we know now, because they told him he wasn't built enough to be Bond.
Right, right.
So it'd be a full circle for him. But I don't know if I want him as Bond now. I think I like him in this weird geek space. I just want him to find the right geek role to make it all worthwhile.
Well, I would be amused if only because he would be the only person who has played both James Bond and Napoleon Solo from Man of Uncle. But no, I have nothing else to talk about ahead of the first episode.
All right. So I'm torn how I want to do this. We'll see how I feel as we're going through it. Part of me wants to do it in the jarring manner that the TV series did it. So we get like 2 minutes of this character, then we talk about it, and then shift hard to the next character for 2 minutes, and then shift hard for 2 minutes
We'll be
constantly.
here for 3
But I'm not
days.
sure how I feel about that until we get into it.
Okay.
Season 1, episode 1, The End's Beginning. What a cute little doe by the water. It is the cutest doe ever. Nothing bad or untoward would happen to that cute little doe in the first image of the show. Of course not. Even though there's a weird, evil bubbling of water next to it. But that doe is right there, standing by the water. Oh shit! It's the Witcher action. Run, Roach! Geralt doesn't give two shits about you. Which, if you play the video game, you know Geralt doesn't give a fuck about Roach. Geralt of Rivia slays a Kikamora in 1231 and quips at the doe that it's having a bad day as you see it's been wounded.
Right.
How is this for an opening for you? Did it grab you when you first saw it?
When I first watched it, yeah. I mean, it does what it's supposed to do. Here's the Witcher. He kills monsters. Here's him doing all that cool stuff. Um, I his relationship with Roach is weird. Because you're right, in the video games, Roach is just the thing that gets you from point A to point B.
Well, in the video games, he says Roach, but I think it's in the somewhere it points out that like this is the 18th Roach. He just names all of his horses Roach.
Right. Yes, he names them all Roach because he wanted to learn a whole new Roach horse's name. But one thing that we see later on, we don't see it much here, is that, like you said, the Witcher actually is fairly loquacious, and some of that is he talks to Roach a lot, and he doesn't just have friends with Roach. He has an antagonistic relationship with Roach. He feels like Roach is judging him. And that's one thing I love about the Geralt Roach relationship is that he gets like, don't you look at me like that, straight up mad at Roach sometimes. And he's like, he's a fucking horse. And like and while I watched this before I read the books, and I was like, is Roach magical? Is Roach like a magic horse? No, he's just a fucking
Nope.
horse. He's just a horse, and Geralt is a little crazy.
Well, part of it goes. One of the reasons I reference Red Dead is because part of it goes back also to the Western genre. If you're out by yourself, it's just you and your horse. That horse is your lifeline to get you everywhere, and there's no one else on the trail to talk to. And people are inclined to talk, regardless of if you like other people or not. And so,
Yeah.
you could ask Tom Hanks about a volleyball on an island if you want to.
It's funny you mentioned it though, because like I hadn't thought about that. You're right. There is tonally a lot of overlap between The Witcher and the outlaw who comes into town to fix things. Especially this first episode, there's a lot of overlap in the tropes of westerns and in how this episode, the Gerald parts of the episode pace out.
So, spoiler, this is my favorite series that we've watched so far because of those similarities.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's very well established. I love westerns, and I felt those all throughout The Witcher. I even felt it the first time I watched it, not even just in comparison to now, but that's why I could make that instant connection rewatching it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on this? Do you want to talk about the Kikamora?
Oh my god, everybody's so long if we do this. It's a good CGI monster. Best CGI monster we've seen so far, frankly.
Since you mentioned Game of Thrones, I'm gonna say this now, and I could be proven wrong before we get done with this. I think that The Witcher is more chaste than the Game of Thrones.
Yes. But women
For
is
all
not.
of its wanting to be mature and oof, it is more chaste than Game of Thrones.
I was gonna say this for later, but I'll kind of talk about it now. My feeling is that it's not chaste necessarily so much as it normalizes nudity in a different way that Game of Thrones did. Game of Thrones, the sex and the nudity are always meant to be kind of a shock or a twist or an allure to draw people in. In The Witcher, people are just fucking naked sometimes, and that's just how it is. And that feels a little more organic to me than how it was done in Game of Thrones. But there are certainly going to be times, and I'll hit them, where it's a bit over the top and a bit unnecessary. It feels like it's a slightly more shoehorned in, but it is not nearly as shoehorned in. That was very clear when we talked about Game of Thrones, where it's like, and now here's the sex scene. That's how it very much felt like in Game of Thrones, whereas this just like, well, of course they're going to have sex here, so here's the sex scene because that's when they're going to have sex.
And well, I agree because what I do like about this is that it does normalize the sex, just how so many other things is nudities and how it's normalized nudity, just how so many other things is tried to normalize violence. Right. That is something that has always frustrated me, that violence is more acceptable than just nudity.
Right. It does feel like there's an even balance between those in this show. I agree with that.
In town, the Witcher is tormented by races until saved from killing them by Renfrey, a cursed princess turned bandit. And we get the first glimpse at how the world views Witchers. a little girl offers to guide Geralt to her father, the alderman, who won't pay him for killing the beast, but the local wizard would. And the girl banters with the Witcher as they walk by, until they make it to the wizard, who then does a massive wizard dumping of exposition. My favorite part of this scene, though, is when we go inside the wizard's tower, is the illusionary paradise that's presented. And then we get as Geralt and the wizard, Stigobor, talk to each other, we get a moment of game knows game. The wizard wants Geralt to kill a monster, Renfrey. The wizard tells us about the curse of the Black Sun. 60 women born on the first eclipse in 1,000 odd years will bring destruction. But he's found the other 59, studied them, found abnormalities in them, and couldn't fix them, so he killed them. And except for Renfrey, and he lists off a slew of evil deeds that she does. He says he can't kill her because she's immune to magic, but excellent with a sword. So he wants to hire Geralt to go and dispatch her for him.
So this part is the most Conan for me, right? It's Conan / Geralt comes into town. He tries to spend some money.
Conan.
People are mad at him. And so he goes to the wizard who's got creepy fucking plans and has magic that Geralt / Conan doesn't quite understand, and wants him to do some nefarious thing that he thinks sounds reasonable, but anyone with half a brain goes, actually, that's really fucking terrible. No, I'm not going to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, this is you can see the Conan influence very much here. This is where I talk about it's very Howardian. It's very, very, this kind of scene is where you feel that influence, I think, is most strongly.
See, I have a slight inverse on that. I get the Conan vibes that you're going for, but the inverse for me is that Geralt, as a Witcher, knows and understands magic. So even in the
Different,
scene, he's pushing back somewhat against it.
sure, but now we're getting into the weeds of Witcher lore, as it were. As I understand it, a lot of Geralt's magic is based on potions and alchemy.
Well, all right, so I'm taking it from the video game perspective. So my knowledge is going to be probably different than yours, like better
Okay.
book knowledge, because it's at least in the game, it's almost a balance of the alchemic knowledge versus like the simple magic for the signs that they know.
Uh, he does know some of those, and if I remember correctly, it's a little. I think because he's a mutant helps him to learn some of that. Um, uh, but I mean, it's a fair shout, right? Like, yes, Geralt actually embraces magic, where Conan rejects it. But in this scene, what Stegobor is doing and the kind of magic he's doing still seems to be anathema to Geralt. The difference is Conan would be like, magic is bad, whereas Geralt's like, oh no, you're actually kind of not doing this right, and maybe you should go a different direction.
See, I take it is that he was letting him explain his evil plan before he gets like his sick burn in on him. Because one of the things that we'll see about Geralt, at least in the TV show, is that he lets people over explain themselves, so then he has full context to say something. It's it's his own version of like deduction for Holmes.
No, fair. Hilariously, the other thing this makes me think of is Columbo.
Yeah, yeah,
Because there's a bit
I
of
can
the
see
I'm
that.
gonna pretend to be a little stupid and get you to explain things to me so I can catch you when you trip up.
Thank you. That's exactly where I was going. Yeah, great. It's so Geralt of Rivia is in fact Conan meets Columbo, the double
Honest,
C's.
honestly, yeah. And I like both of those characters, so I'm predisposed to liking Geralt. But the other thing is, I want to talk about the illusion a bit, is because this is a good example of what we're talking about the nudity, because he's an old wizard, so he has all these beautiful naked women around him. The difference is that if this was Game of Thrones, we would be up them, right? We would be zoomed in on them. By the way, hey, there are naked women here, and they're naked. Oh my god, they're so naked. But like half the time during a scene, they're like in soft focus and they're way in the background. So like you get an established scene of seeing, yes, there are women here, and then they just become part of the background.
Are you trying to explain to us, Eddie, the difference between hardcore and softcore porn? Is that the conversation we're about to have?
No, it's more along the lines of like a 15-year-old's relationship with nudity and an adult's relationship with a nudity.
Oh, I love it. And thank you, because that brings in a specific character beat. Because Stiggerbor says he took over the tower from another wizard from like a long time ago,
Right,
and Geralt asks specifically about the illusion and if that was already here, and he says, "No, I made that to like spend my time or whatever," which is another thing for like Geralt investigating, finding out more about Stegobor.
right.
So like little touches like that are why I got my bit about him investigating.
Yeah, and frankly, this is the part of The Witcher I like. Again, if you, having read the short stories, the short stories are, like I said, I keep saying this, but like Conan style monster hunts, but they're also written like noir mysteries, which is the everyone's lying to me. I need to find out who's lying to me in what ways to actually solve the problem, which may involve murdering a monster. But like, this is a good story to start with. This is not actually the original starting story, I believe. But the idea of you kill the monster, oh, and it happens to be this princess. That kind of twist is pretty common in the Witcher stories. Again, we're only a couple scenes in, but you have a pretty good sense of how these stories are ultimately going to go. Is that everyone's going to be a little shady. Gerald's, but we've also talked about the overlap between the noir detective and the cowboy before, right? He's the guy, the outsider comes from out of town who sees through everyone's lies because
Mhm.
he's not part of the community. He's also a little reluctant to speak, but he has secret knowledge that nobody else in his community has, which is why he's able to break through the mystery slash crime. And so, yeah, there's a lot of Western noir overlap anyway, and this show slathers fantasy on top of it, which, again, when I first watched it, I was like, this is all my buttons.
Anything else before we move on?
Now we need to get through all of this. So much to talk about.
Uh, in Sintra, Princess Syria is scooped up off the streets to perform her actual duties. Then we have a royal dance. All three of the nobles appear to be bored while they're whispering a conversation about Nilfgaard and a war that's impending, and an offhanded mention of the Wild Hunt. The queen dismisses the talk about the war before sending Syria off to dance with an unwanted suitor. The queen learns that the Nilfgaardian army is actually already here, and horror overtakes her face. But she chooses not to tell Syria anything, so she can have one final night of happiness.
So the Siri Calanthe storyline, since it kind of starts here, I'll focus to just to start the moment. I have different opinions as we move on, but um, at the start, I liked it. It's pretty clear they're trying to make this their Sansa Stark, right?
Yeah.
Um, we did have the courtly
Okay.
intrigue. Oh, go ahead.
Question for you before we get into it. Now that you've said that, who started first? Did Martin write Game of Thrones first, or did AS write The Witcher first?
Oh, Witcher goes back to 85. Game of Thrones started in the 90s. So technically speaking, yes, series first. But also Ciri in the book doesn't have nearly this much. Like, in the books, we see her where the show is like episode 5. So all
Okay.
of this stuff beforehand, we don't see.
Cool.
So that's why I say this. So technically speaking, this view of Ciri is unique to the show, and therefore is a modern invention, and therefore that's why I feel like it's drawn from Game of Thrones.
Cool.
Is
Thank
we
you.
need kind of an Arya Sansa amalgam, although she starts off more Sansa and ends up more Arya. Spoiler. But so like this whole storyline feels a bit thin. But I really love Queen Caliente
Yeah.
because it's so cool to see. Because first, like, oh, she's the queen, and like she's kind of a badass, but she's not humorless, which is rare. And then you find out, no, she's like straight up the leader of her army, and she is a martial badass. And they actually work that into her characterization of like she is a martial queen. She's a conqueror queen, and just you don't see characters like that, but you also don't see characters like that who also have humor and warmth and a family connection.
Yep.
So Caliente is on screen for such a short period of time, but she's
But her
such a cool
presence is
character.
felt. because
Yeah,
she's the person knighting people to put
yeah,
them into place into the power, which is exceptional.
yeah. No, it's so I the series kind of secondary to my love of to what I like about this subplot, but the actual it's like the character I like the least is the one who escapes the subplot, which is the frustrating part.
In the woods, Renfrey confronts Geralt about meeting with the wizard and how she used to be a princess until the wizard sent an assailant that violated her, then let her go, who then she later killed. But then she turned to robbery and thievery to support her new life, as she can no longer be a princess to survive. And nothing will stop her. And we get our first clue about the story being told in a different time from something that she says.
Mhm.
She wants the Witcher to kill the wizard, as it is the lesser evil. And Geralt quips that that is not the first time today he's heard that. Geralt asks if she's a monster, and she says she doesn't know. They debate about what makes a monster, and why not killing those who hate them is probably key to it. The Witcher tries to convince her to leave and live her life.
Oh God. Geralt's dry humor is so God, just so great. Um, and we skip over the introduction of Josker, so I'll kind of just say that's one of the reasons why he and Josker makes great things because their senses of humor, they both have a sense of humor, but they're very different styles of humor, and that's why they work well together. But even by himself, just the sheer kind of just that's the first time I've heard that today, and the way he delivers that straight line is fucking hysterical because Cavill has amazing comedic timing.
Which is surprising on so many levels that Cavill would have such great humor and banter like that, though. That's
Hmm.
unexpected.
Yes, and um, I feel like knowing now what I didn't know then, knowing that he was kind of pushing against the script to try to drag it back to the slightly more witty Geralt, I feel like he's giving these line readings very specific intonations to try to get that across. So I chalk a lot of it up to Cavill specifically in these early scenes.
He is, because there was an interviews where he talked about he was ad libbing some stuff that was taken from the books, and that wasn't necessarily well received either, but he still did it.
Hmm.
I like the scene between the both of them in the woods to have, and I know it's somewhat trite, but to have a discussion about what makes a monster and how they both view themselves as monsters of a sort and are fighting against one's fighting against it and the other one's embracing it because it was forced on her. So that was a nice parallel to see.
Right, but I mean, it also helps set the tone for the season. If like is the yes, The Witcher's a monster hunter, but what defines a monster is a very different thing in this show. And so therefore, the conflict that Geralt has between literal monsters and uh, psychological monsters, I suppose, and the fact that he is not always he is required to distinguish between them, and nobody else always, not very many people trust his judgment on that. That's all part and package of The Witcher, and one of the reasons why he's an outsider. Like the show does a pretty good job of explaining that the fact that he's a mutant is only the excuse that people make. The real reason why he's an outsider is that people do not like someone coming in and making judgments on them. But that is literally his job. And so he's brought in, he's paid to do a job that nobody else wants to do, and then he is forced out because they don't want him around anymore. And that is his life. And this show does a really good job of balancing that.
Anything else about this before we bounce it on again?
No, I think we move on.
2 days later, in Ciri's timeline, the Centurions and the Nilfgaardians engage in a massive combat, while Ciri is left under the care of her mage Mousak and a guard at the castle. We get some time with Ciri before flashing back to the battle and seeing how badass the queen
Mm-hmm.
is, and then an arrow in the eye, fucking like pow, killing her husband. And then you see that she breaks down on the battlefield, and like she's broken after seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go back to the castle a short while later with a bored Ciri wandering the castle and having her final moments with her grandmother. Ciri says, I love you. And the grandmother says, you must find Geralt of Rivia.
Uh, so watching this right after watching the Blackwater episode of Game of Thrones, there's very obvious connections between those two. They're not fair connections because this is a couple of scenes, whereas that was a whole episode, right? Um, but I feel like the battle, the intensity and passion of the battle, I feel it more in the Witcher episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like even though the battle is a much smaller scale and doesn't have the same money behind it, it's more effective for being briefer. But then uh, his grandmother saying you have to find Joe Ribia and whatnot. That whole second half of it feels so clunky and forced compared to the very natural progression of the characters through the Battle of Blackwater in that episode, right? Because we saw the characters evolve and change for that battle over the course of an hour in Game of Thrones. And here it's just kind of a hard shift to okay, well my husband's dead, so I'm broken, so I guess find the Witcher, I suppose. Obviously they don't have the same scope. It's not fair to compare them, but it's because we're watching so close together. It's hard not to draw some comparisons.
I can see that, and but I'm gonna say I'm gonna tell you just did. It all boils down to the amount of time they had dedicated screen time they had dedicated to it. Not even talking about the budget. Leave that alone because the acting in both of those were exceptional.
Right. Yes. No. Yeah. In both cases, given the again, like we talked before, like uh, Caliente's done here. I mean, I think she gets some flashbacks episodes after this, but more or less she's done
She
after this
does.
point in time. So she's got like 20 minutes of screen time, if that. And I care about her at the end of this. Whereas in Game of Thrones, it took several seasons and an hour-long episode to get me there with other characters. So I mean, the acting
I
is
care.
is immaculate. It's just part of me wishes this was also maybe an hour long. Part of me wishes like there's a thing where yeah, The Witcher's case is one episode, series history is one episode, but I also recognize for a show called The Witcher, you kind of need to have Geralt in every episode. So I see the argument for why they did it this way, even though I don't agree with it.
I still don't agree with it. I think you could have called it The Witcher, but have given Yennefer and both Ciri one episode of their own out of an 8-episode season arc. Because you could have front loaded the first two to kind of focus on Geralt, and then given one of them to the other one, and then the other one after that.
I mean, the other thing also is we're jumping ahead slightly, but like we see other Witchers in later episodes. So like we could have had just find a reason to put a Witcher into the Ciri and the Yennefer subplots to start with.
Yeah,
Make those the original characters. So wait, oh, it's about the Witcher is a different the Witcher each time, and so you realize eventually no, we're only talking about one Witcher, which is Geralt.
so, but anyway,
But yeah,
later, Geralt is talking to Roach's horse about some Witcher 101 lore stuff for people that don't know anything about the world, haven't read the books, or haven't played the games. And Riffle sneaks up on him, asks him what he believes is, ask him what he believes in before feigning agreement with the Witcher's ultimatum that she will in fact leave town. And then they do the deed. They have the sex on the show. It is more chase sex than what we ever saw in Game of Thrones.
right.
It's
Um,
dream sex almost.
and I like the scene also because first of all, this is again part of my assertion that his relationship with Roach is much more complicated than perhaps we've seen in other media. But also the way it's framed, because it's such an obvious exposition dump. When I first saw it, I was like, "This is weirdly clunky," and then Renfrey shows up, and I'm like, "Oh, Geralt knew she was there and used the excuse talking to his horse to explain stuff to her before she
Mm-hmm.
showed up." I'm like, "That's fucking clever," and that is very much Geralt. He is. I keep making the Conan analogy, but this is one where he's very different because he's extremely subtle.
Love it. Then we flash back to Sintra. We find out that Mousak had held the castle for a couple of hours against constant attacks. This is where Ciri runs off to try to escape, but her bodyguard is killed. Mousak ducks down a side alley to do something. The queen leaps off of a high tower. All the royals inside of the castle take poison, and the Nilfgaardians are like killing and torturing everyone as they go through. I'm going to move on unless you have specific comments about
No,
that
just more
because we're going
Caliente
to
is
wrap up.
awesome. Let's move on.
Geralt dreams of his night with Renfrey. who tells him of a girl who is his destiny. Upon waking up the next morning, he realizes that she is not going to stop until Steggerbore dies. He picks up his shit and races to town. He meets her goon squad, who says he must choose between the lesser evil. Geralt replies the only way one
Fuck.
could. Fuck.
Well, that's
Then the battle of the best episode, the best battle of the whole episode commences. We get witchery death left and right, dodging crossbow bolts, sword stabbing. After killing her men, he fights and fatally wounds Renfrey, whose dying words tell of a girl in the forest who is his eternal destiny. Is the destiny bit been hammered in yet?
uh, which is a subplot. It's a trope I don't like. But I can't be mad about it because man, this whole fucking scene is great. um, I mean, just again, perfect dry humor of like, we're gonna kill you and you're a mutant. You need to get out of town. He just goes, fuck, and he starts fighting. It's the sigh that sells that whole thing, right? It's just like these assholes again. And again, I know that Game of Thrones is tonally a very different show in some respects, but holy shit, this battle scene is way better than anything on Game of Thrones.
It is. It's just so beautiful and brutal and well executed.
Yeah.
Because all right, I don't know how I'm going to say it, but it doesn't glorify combat how some fights do, but it displays the prowess that it takes to be engaged in a fight like that.
It very much draws from Asian cinema, right? This is a Chow Yun Fat style fight scene in the sense of it is excessively, egregiously violent, but it is shot and choreographed in a very beautiful way, which forces you to confront the two sides of that. This is clearly a lot of passion and talent and skill, both for the characters and the team, have gone into this scene, but also because it juxtaposes the violence is even that much more horrific because it is put right up against this very elegant shooting style. Um, and so you get something a bit like a Chow Yun Fat or later Asian cinema violent scenes. Even if you want to go to Marvel, the Daredevil hallway fight scenes, right?
Mm.
You're so amazed by the cinematography that forces you to watch it more closely, which means the horror is that much more resonant for you.
Absolutely. Love it. Moving on, unless you have anything else you want to
Nope.
discuss about that
Ah, it's a
amazing
good scene.
fight scene.
Nope, good scene.
The Nilfgaardian officer captures Ciri, and he's convinced to ride out of town, but seeing the burning city and the castle triggers her power for the second time, this time more impressively, allowing her to escape.
She has a sonic scream. Cool.
Hey man, I've watched the Black Canary kick a lot of butt, and that sonic scream is no joke. Mind you, in the Arrow TV series, it's not that great.
No. Banshee, however, is a badass, and I will take nothing said against him.
If
Or her.
Ciri could learn to fly by projecting her sonic scream downward,
Right? See? There you go.
Stigabor and the other townfolk arrived in the wake of the death and destruction that's left. Spying the dead Renfrey, he wants a body for his autopsy and explains that the mutant must have influences people. When Gerald opposes, the townfolk force him to leave as the urging of Steggerbore, who tells him all sorts of bloody parts of Gerald's past and the death that he's committed here, and saying he made a choice. The little girl he saved tells him to leave and never return. As the Witcher leaves angrily, the townspeople taunt him, but part way when he gets close to make sure that he doesn't fuck him up. And we end the episode.
Yep. Which is taking the Ciri subplot out. This is just a great single story about Gerald. It tells you everything you need to know about the world. Even the exposition has an explanation as to why the exposition's happening. And you see that this is not a fun setting where the monster hunter gets their monster and goes off happy. This is a very complicated world where Gerald is protects a world that loves and fears that hates and fears him. It's very much kind of the X-Men vibe. And so you start to understand why Gerald is so taciturn and gruff and reluctant is because the only person who showed him love and affection is the person he was supposed to kill.
If I were to write fantasy, Eddie, it would be fantasy like this,
Yeah,
because
totally.
I love how magic is a part of it. It's powerful, but it's not overwhelming. There are some random confines to it that are somewhat explainable, and it has a logic base to it.
Yep.
But from how the world treats everything, it feels lived in and fleshed out.
hmm I think my biggest complaint, and granted, this changes over time, but uh, one reason I like about the magic of The Witcher is the fact that it is powerful, but also it has some rules that are arbitrary, but also some rules that are understandable. Like you have to speak a certain sign, you have to use a certain sign in the video games. But for me, it's always more about the alchemical thing. I think, okay, I have to gather these herbs and get these potions, and then these potions make me powerful. But then there's the logical complaints of like I have to find a place to store the potion, I have to make sure it's secure, make sure glass doesn't break. There's
Yep.
all these real world rules around using potions that actually are logically understandable, and therefore when the constraints come in, it's the oh okay, well of course you can't drink it because your mouth's been tied shut or you can't reach your things or whatever. So it's a good balance of making magic, the rules of magic, intuitive, which is very hard to do. And that's one of the things I've always loved about, which specifically is that the potion side of it. But you're right, it goes in other directions. But as far as this episode is concerned, it did lay out more or less. This guy can create entire illusions and summon people and whatnot, but yet it doesn't feel like he could just wipe the floor with the Witcher. He's not the sorceress from Beastmaster. You can't just do whatever the story demands.
Season 1, episode 3, Betrayer's Moon. We open with a dying man explaining what attacked him to a different Witcher, who requests 3,000 orens up front, which the family pays. We follow the other Witcher on his hunt, taking a potion so he can see in the dark before jumping over to Geralt, drinking and fornicating. His lover goes over his scars and talks about the bard who is singing his tales. She tells him about another Witcher going to Temeria last month, but taking the money from the miners and running off. Geralt banters with Roach before leaving the horse as collateral for his debt.
Don't
In
look at me like
this
that.
bear in mind, the miners plan to overthrow the king as he won't save them from the beast. The leader, the miner's son was killed, and he's leading these people, and he wants to kill the king. He wants revenge. Gerald offers him an apology and offers to kill the beast for 1/3 of the orens, only afterwards. Before the miners can agree, the king's men with goons break in, trying to persuade the miners to return to work, and no one needs to know about this treason. Then a couple of soldiers are ordered to escort the Witcher out of town. On a dark, deserted road, Tess Marigold, the King Folstad's sorceress advisor, intervenes, saying she wants Gerald to save it. Tess explains 6 years ago, citizens started disappearing, and the creature was coming from the crypt where the king's sister was buried, who was rumored to be pregnant. Tess offers him 2,000 orens to identify what killed them. He deduces it is a creature born from a curse. The curse turned her daughter into a monster, the princess.
Strega, for reference.
It's called a
So
or a strega if people want it translated.
we are led to I forgot to mention this last time, but one of the interesting elements of this being fantasy translated from Polish is that sometimes we get Polish words for things, sometimes we get odd translations for Polish names, like mouse sack, as an example.
Or Jocks here in this is also called like dandelion in the video game.
Dandelion, yep. And I'm used to being called dandelion, actually. Um,
But I like the name Joxer better though than dandelion.
I agree, but I'm just I remember dandelion from the novels, and it's like oh wait no, it's Oscar. Um, but yes, so and that to me, one of the things I like about The Witcher overall is that it's because it's drawing from a different cultural heritage than one I'm intimately familiar with. There are new things that the world takes for granted, but I don't necessarily take for granted. So like, there's no dragon or Greek monsters or anything that I'm intimately familiar with. It's the I don't know what a Strega is, but oh, what's a Strega? Cool. And it's like, so to me, there's a sense of discovery that comes with that just from watching the show or reading the books or whatever that I do enjoy.
Do you know that I knew what a Strega was beforehand?
You did?
Well, not before this, but I knew what the Strega was because part of my research for Haunted West was that I was researching a bunch of different cultures that came over to the U.S. and that meant
Oh,
some of their mythology and supernatural stuff that also associated with it.
nice. Very
And
cool.
I went down a rabbit hole for like this sort of folklore too.
Yeah, yeah, because certainly there were a lot of people from Poland that moved over to the U.S. That's for sure.
Yeah. So it was an all-encompassing project, which gave me a touchstone for a lot of things, and it's fun to see them pop up.
I could totally see that. Yeah.
Um, I liked the introduction of a different Witcher,
Hmm.
and while they tried to play coy by having the Witcher be in the shadows, you knew it was going to be a different Witcher because he was in the shadows. Like
Right.
that's doesn't work, but it was nice.
Well, I liked it because the show didn't take too long to dissuade you of that, right? It's the he's secretly in shadows, and 5 minutes later, it's like, oh, that was obviously a different Witcher. I mean, so the mystery doesn't last for too long, whereas other shows have been like dragged out for like a whole episode or even multiple episodes. It's like, no, we all know it's not this guy, right? Stop doing this. But this is like going, it's is it Gerald? No, it's not. Okay, cool. But I also
So,
like the
but
fact sorry, one thing I was gonna say is like one thing this show's doing now that it will sadly stop doing a few episodes from now is that it's written slightly more like episodic television early on, because the scene of the woman he's with going through his scars, if you notice, slightly recaps who the Witcher is and what he's about.
mm-hmm, love it. Um, but if you think about it, if you look at the other Witcher who requests his 3,000 orens up front, and you remember seeing the first episode, Geralt never got paid for anything he did that episode. So then you could be like, well, man, that's not a bad idea. Why isn't he asking for money up front?
Right. And the answer is because shit like this happens.
Yep. I love the fact that we get more of a development between Geralt and Rote still. Like that is the
Yeah.
underlying relationship I'm loving because this is like his saying the moment of like don't judge me that you get before he leaves him his collateral for his debt.
So good. That had to have been an improv because it's so good though. But I love it. You're right. The way that, well, I love it because like you said before, you're all alone, especially after we saw in the first episode. This is a creature he can connect to, and so he has an emotional connection to it. It very much feels like people are shipped their pets. But also, what I love is happening in that scene is that he is showing more emotion to his horse than he's showing to the people who are threatening him. And that very quietly shows you just how much of a badass Gerald is. He doesn't care. He cares more about his horse's opinion of him than anybody else holding a sword to him.
Which then contrasts one of the points that everyone believes is folklore in the world about witchers, how they have no emotion. Like the process that
Yep.
chained them into witchers stripped them of all their emotions,
Yep.
which we get repeatedly. That's not true.
Right.
Which then makes you think, are the witchers putting on an act so that people think that, or how is that part of the myth?
See, I actually took it as more racism, right? I actually took it as, the same things that people say about other races. It's like, oh, well, you're good at math or whatever, um, as a justification for treating them shitty. When in fact, is that treating them like shit is why they have no emotions. Is because you've taught me I shouldn't engage with you because you're gonna treat me like shit. And say, no, that's just because you don't have any emotions. So I took it as just straight up racism.
Nice. Okay. See, I'm torn because part of it is I am taking some of it as racism, but also some of it is a myth and urban legend associated with the Witchers that would be a slightly different thing than that. So they'd
Oh,
fall into different
I think they're
buckets.
incompatible. Right? It's
Wow.
it's the same thing of the urban myth of like, oh, Asian people eat dog kind of stuff, right? And then we
Mm-hmm.
saw some recently how that kind of spun out. So I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. Is that it may have even been like early Witchers were trains don't show emotions, and then it became kind of a cycle there. Um, but for me specifically, it's the you don't have emotions because of this process. To me, that the because of that's where it starts changing. It's not
Okay.
you're not trained to not have emotions because of your job. It's not you have emotions because I come from a different culture than you and I express my emotions differently. No, it must be because you're a mutant. Because of who you are, that must be why you are this way.
Mm. Uh, what you've also can notice is you're walking through it. You get that you can already see after even these 2 episodes that Geralt's first move is not to engage in combat. It's almost more of a de-escalator in almost every situation,
Yeah.
which is an incredible response for someone who is a proficient killer. To like, I don't want to have to fight. I'd rather we just talk this out. Just let's be friends. Like, don't revolt against the king because even if you overthrow him, then what's going to happen to
I also personally got very strong freelancer cleaning up and the freelancers bullshit vibes
you?
of the I know the last freelancer fucked you over. So I'll take it at a reduced rate and I'll take my payment afterwards because I know I have to build trust with you for a long-term contract because you're a new client to me.
And we get the introduction of Triss Marigold. So in the game, Triss is sort of another love interest that you can have. I'm not sure in the books, but in the TV series, her role seems to have been greatly diminished versus what I remember playing in the games.
Okay, so first of all, let's unpack real quickly. One of the huge, massive problems with Witcher One, the video game, is that you literally got a collectible playing card for fucking women in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Literally objectifying the women you're having sex with in the game. So Triss has kind of an outsized perspective in the video game community because she was one of the harder people to get that card for.
So when I say it, I'm speaking of Witcher 3. Like I said, I only played a little bit of Witcher
Right, right,
1
right. Well, my point is that
and Witcher 2.
because of that outsized perception, she became a character that players want to see more of. So she got bigger roles in 2 and then therefore in 3. Right.
Ah, okay.
So she's seen as the main love interest because she was the hardest card to get in the first game.
People.
Uh, Plus, also she's a voluptuous redhead. And I know a lot of people when they watched the series were outraged because Triss was not a voluptuous redhead. And it's like, let's be honest, if you're writing Polish fantasy, dark-haired, slimmer women are going to be what you see more of, right? But I mean, and let's put the cards on the table also because Triss is not white, which I'm sure is another factor in all of this. So all of that said, I personally like Triss in the show.
I
I
wanted to
don't
have a
know
bigger
if I
role.
say I like her better because you're right. She doesn't have as much. I feel like a lot of the stuff they do with Yennefer could have just been given to Triss, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't happen. Triss doesn't have as much room in the show as she does in the video games. It seems like it's closer to the novels. Again, I've not read all of them. I feel like the video games blew up her relationship. But I just genuinely like Triss because she presents herself as an equal to Geralt. And Geralt just immediately accepts that, which points to the other thing I like about The Witcher as a whole is that now we're in episode 3. We've seen several women characters, and women have way more agency in these 3 episodes than they've had in the past 3 seasons of Game of Thrones.
Yes, hands down, absolutely. Even like the first episode, Jesus.
Right.
I like the deduction scene that Geralt does because
Mm,
that goes back to proving once again that like a Witcher is more of a planner and thinker than just like a straight up fighter.
yeah.
Which also one of the reasons why I like Elric so much versus Conan because Elric was sort of a counterpoint to Conan,
Yeah, no, I can see that.
which gave
Honestly, if I read more Elric, I could see an argument for this is much closer to Elric than Conan, but frankly, I just don't know
yes.
enough about Elric to make that comparison.
Um, anything else about this before we move on?
Uh, like you, like I do like this is more Geralt as detective, and I frankly wish there was more of this in the show as a whole. But you're right, he's doing some kind of Sherlock Holmes shit here. It's like Trish gives him information. He's like, oh, it's obviously a strikeout. And blah, blah, blah. But what I also like about this is that Triss has a certain piece of knowledge and Gerald has a certain piece of knowledge, and when they combine that, they are both getting new information from that sharing of knowledge. Triss is not just the person who gives the information that the detective solves the problem. They're both getting different pieces of information. So they both have specialized sets of knowledge that when they combine, they get a better sense of the larger picture. So Triss is not diminished by this conversation, which is actually pretty hard to do.
And to that point also, she is a person that decided to hide the other Witcher's body because everyone else thinks they ran off. And she explains that she hid the Witcher because if people knew that the monster killed the Witcher, then everyone would have fled the kingdom.
Right. Right.
So
Which
that's
shows
like
the
her making
political
active
astuteness.
choices.
Yeah. Which makes sense as a king's advisor. She's be more politically astute and better sense of how large groups of people do, which Geralt is not geared for. Geralt's much more about the one-on-one relationships.
Anything else before we move on?
Now let's move on. Fucking Yennefer.
Yennefer and Estrid, aka Watson, fuck as an illusionary crowd claps for their amazing skills at it. She's nearly finished her training and gets to choose an enchantment, but doesn't know what. She doesn't want to return to the powerless person she was before. The Brotherhood of Sorcerers discuss the allocation of their newly initiated to their respective kingdoms. Though Sturgabor is scheming, and Yennefer is assigned to Nilfgaard instead of the other kingdom that she wanted due to her elven blood. Eddie, who doesn't want to be doing something and when you finish, have a group of people clap for it, regardless of what said activity is?
Oh, God. So this is where my argument of sex is more normalized starts to get a little rough because this scene is just so gratuitous. It's so clear, and also there's a very strong vibe of condescension around it, of feeling like Yennefer should be thankful that she got fucked. Like, oh well, because you're so disabled, you should be lucky you were getting sex at all. It's not explicit, but there's a vibe of that around this scene that bugs me, frankly.
See, I don't see that. I almost see it the other way around. But then that could be, I could also be reading that from later context of what's going to happen in this episode.
Right. It's something that gets reframed later, which I will say to the show's credit, the show, because of its out of time order, it constantly shoots for this thing you saw earlier. Now you have new context and it reframes it for you. Because it's so unclear what's happening timeline wise, that is ultimately muddied. But it's clear what the show's trying to shoot for. So in the moment of this, it's like, it's kind of icky. And later on, it's like, oh, actually, Yennefer has more power in that relationship than we first thought. So it does manage to redeem that, but it's still a trope of disabled people should be thankful to have physical intimacy. That bugs me.
I understand that. It is nice to have another recurring character of Sturgabor, even though he's an evil fuck with plans of his own. So that's also a nice touch to it there.
Yeah. And then the Elven blood note is another different strain of racism. But again, unlike Game of Thrones, this show is directly dealing with characters that have isms, but the scripts and the show are not engaging in those. The characters are. And I feel like there's a tonal difference here than with Game of Thrones, where it's like women are treated badly, so the scripts also treat women badly. Whereas here, it's like these women are being treated badly, but we do see that they have agency in their own situations, you know?
Mm-hmm. And before, I don't think any of our listeners would say this, but before anyone says, well, this was written, what, 6 years later or whatever, I still think about when you're saying this is 2019. Game of Thrones was like 2011, so like 8 years later.
Yeah.
2011. So, I want to kibosh any sort of concern that might have been about the time when it was written. It should have been better and written like this well beforehand for either.
And even if you want to argue that, the later seasons didn't change course.
Triss goes before the king, saying Geralt can cure the girl. The baby grew inside of the dead mother for years, feeding on the corpse, and mutated into the monster before emerging when it was too hungry. Alone with the king, the Witcher forces him to admit the affair between Falstad and his sister. The Witcher is ordered to leave Temeria or else. Later, Triss finds the Witcher hiding and undertaking the mission anyway, even though he's not getting paid. We get a cornerstone of The Witcher, more investigations. Eat your heart out, Holmes. They find
Literally.
proof of the affair. He confronts the accuser, Ostrid, who claims to have loved the princess, and instead cursed Folstad because he wanted to watch him suffer. So we find like the actual person that did it. We get a confrontation with the king. We get Geralt being super cool and stealthy.
Hmm.
Perfect
And
reborn.
uh, uh, one thing that again, like the show is doing really good, and then it just fell off a cliff on is that it was also good at shifting genres. Like we talked before, it's like oh, it's actually a detective show. So the show's selling a detective show, and as we settle into the realization it's a detective show, actually it's also a horror show. And so they talk about the horrible things, this baby eating its way outside of a dead mother, and it's just like this is not. We don't need this for our cool detective show. We don't need this kind of detail. Nope, it's a horror show now. Fucking deal with it. Um,
But
so
it's the
like
best kind of horror show because it doesn't show it to you. It's described to you in a way that is even better because you imagine it's more horrific than what they could put on screen.
right, and there's a later scene that gives you a visual. It doesn't show you everything, but because description earlier, you're filling in the gaps, which makes it even more horrible.
Like
So it's a
that,
good horror show.
we don't need to see someone's teeth getting knocked out. Another
Right.
dig at the irregulars, even like my Watson joke.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But still, the irregulars is still good, but I can't occasionally have to make a dig.
Yep, agreed.
Anything else here?
Nope, let's move on.
Yennefer angrily ends her relationship with Estrid, knowing only he could have told Stuggerbor about her heritage. He admits he was tricked and did it for favor. He promises to fix it in his new position as a researcher where she could come with him. She refutes him, saying she wants more power. He can never really read her mind, and she doesn't want to just do dusty research. During the ball upstairs, we get another glimpse of where Yin's story is in the timeline, because we have young Falstad and his sister. Having missed graduation, Yennefer undergoes a painful transformation to become beautiful at the cost of her fertility. With her new body, Yen claims her previous position with another king, into taking her as an advisor, sending Fringilla to Nilfgaard instead.
All right, so I've given Yennefer a lot of stick. I do have to say though, even though I still do not like the trope, I completely respect two things. One, that she has utter and complete agency in this change. She basically forces someone to do this to her. And
Mm-hmm.
also, she is shown to be a complete badass during the process of it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that she is nude during the scene, and it is not in any way a sexy scene. We do not see something we saw of a little bit in Game of Thrones, and we've seen other shows of sexualizing pain and violence of women.
Hey.
This is just a gruesome scene. You see nothing but her pain. It is not sexualized in any way, shape, or form. This is not desirable. Yes, she is nude, but that is just because of the nature of what's happening to her right now.
And it
And the
looks
show's
and
really good.
sounds painful as it does it.
Yeah, and even though she's nude, there's also lots of things like watching her try to stand back up because of her hunch, and watching her shoulder pop and snap. That could have been a very sexualized thing if you'd done in the front, so she's forced to kind of stick her chest out and whatnot. But no, they shot it from the back because that's where this change is happening. And so you see like the bones of her spine as she's hunched over. Um, it's very much played like a scene like out of something like The Fly or whatever. Again, it's a horror show now. And so the horror of what's happening to her, and the fact is that she wants this, and then we cut to her being in this beautiful moment. Again, don't like the trope, but it's a great contrast of She looks very composed. She's very elegant. She's very sexy. But we saw what got her there, and so you don't feel joy in her being sexualized in a moment. You recognize this is another manifestation of her power. So it does a really good job of the way they contrast that, so that we as the audience don't get as much sensual satisfaction of seeing a beautiful woman because we saw what got her there, and that's good. That undercuts all the bullshit again Game of Thrones would do, where they would heavily sexualize these moments purely for viewer satisfaction.
Absolutely. I do want to take a beat to talk about Fringilla, who is dancing with the king of Arden, which is going to be
Mhm.
the assignment that Jennifer is going to get, and as an advisor, and he insults how she dances, amongst other things. And we know that Jennifer is supposed to go to Niflgaard, which instead is where she actually ends up sending Fringilla to.
Mhm.
Which here is like a total small bit of the scene. Nothing really jumps out about it, but it is so important to the rest of the story that they're telling in the TV series.
Right, and I think that's one of the problems, honestly, is that for all the stick we've been giving Game of Thrones lately, Game of Thrones is really good about re-emphasizing when you drop back into a new time frame or a new point of view, either recapping or at least giving you enough visual imagery to know immediately what you are, what you're there. And sometimes it comes across as we kept saying nothing really happens because they kind of have to spend so much time establishing things and they're back out of the scene by the time they actually progress a little bit. So it feels like it's very slow. The Witcher is much faster paced, but it hinges on you paying extremely close attention to this TV show, which the show has not prepared you to do. If the show has prepared you for, it's gonna be it's gonna be a fantasy show about a dark guy, grim dark guy fighting monsters. And so it's expecting you to remember small bits like this episodes and episodes later. Which, granted, this was released all at once as opposed to Game of Thrones coming out weekly. So there's a format shift that we're talking about here. But if you like, when I first watched this, frankly, I was not paying close attention to it, and so a lot of times I was lost. That's the part of the reason I went back to read the books. I was like, maybe the books explain it better. It turns out the books are doing somewhat different stuff. But watching stuff again, I'm like, oh, now I remember. Yes, that part ties this part coming up on it. So I got it on the second watch. So the show was so careful about seeding the stuff in, like I said, which is like it's elegant and it's subtle, but the problem is that it's a little too subtle, and there's so much going on that sometimes those little deals got lost.
So I'm not a fan of the binge model. I think it's a waste of television. They shouldn't do it because you
I
burn through
agree.
everything and you don't catch things that you should. And this is super subtle, which makes it great rewatch television because then you pick up all the things. Hey, I didn't notice that before, and you start piecing them together, which encourage you to do a rewatch, which is a brilliant move to constantly get like viewing figures for your show later on.
I guess so, but it does require you to make sure the audience. I was about to say make sure the audience has enough investment first time around, but as I say that, I realize the initial investment, frankly, is Gerald, right?
Yeah.
It's the you're watching the show primarily because you want to see a very hot man who has had his shirt off multiple times. So we're back to that trope. Thank you very much. Um, who loves his horse and beats the shit out of bad people. And then there's other stuff going on that maybe will make sense later. So Gerald is the reason why you go back and rewatch it. So I mean, I was about to give that a negative mark, but frankly, the show's doing a good job of like, no, we're here to watch. This is Cavill's show. We're here primarily to watch Cavill do Monster of the Week, literally, and then over time, it's oh, and then there's the serious stuff and Yennefer stuff. I didn't quite catch up the first time because I wasn't paying attention next. I wanted to get back to Naked Albino,
Yep.
and now I want to go back and watch those to figure out what was going on with those scenes. So I think you're right. Now that I talk it through, I think you actually have a valid point.
Geralt prepares to cure the princess, but only to meet Volstad's men outside. The king questions if the Witcher's plan will work. Will his daughter be normal? We learn that Geralt is doing this because of Renfried and having had killed her in the first episode. Ostred explains a ritual he used to make the curse happen. And then Geralt uses Ostred as bait. He realizes that he'll have to fight the creature until dawn, and so he begins downing potions like they're nothing. Geralt battles the Striga using all of his tricks and magic. He gets the ever living shit kicked out of him and only wins by hiding in the crypt moment before dawn so the creature can't enter. And as it transforms back into the princess, he goes over too soon and she stabs him in the throat. He bites her and he wakes up sometime later being mended by Triss, who tells him that the king has honored Ostrad, saying that he died in service trying to cure the princess. And she asks if his life is only going to be coins and monsters, and he says it's a good life to have. He
Hmm.
leaves to spring Roach from his imprisonment, and she comments that destiny is swirling around him.
Destiny.
Destiny.
Uh, so this scene reminds me of when we were talking about way back when we were talking about Daredevil, in the sense of a scene that is almost exhausting to watch,
Yeah.
and this felt like that similarly. Obviously it's not literally a fight till dawn, but the way it's shot, it feels like that. As in the first episode, very beautiful and choreographed, and it was great to see that. This is just a slog of a fight, not to watch, but you could feel Gerald's energy sapping just by watching it. It's well done in a very different way.
Which is how it's supposed to be. And then also it shows you how intense the fighting must be, because we've seen Gerald in the other Witcher take a potion to do something.
Yep.
Instead, he's like chugging multiple potions
Right.
to be able to handle this fight that's coming, which you already know must be incredible, because we've seen Witchers are slightly superhumanly strong, fast, and all these other great traits that you need. And he needs all this additional stuff to be able to fight this one creature. And we get a glimpse of a silver chain that he tries to use, because silver hurts monsters, that it throws off like it's nothing. And he's not using his swords because he doesn't want to kill the creature.
Right.
So it's love it.
And to my earlier point, like the creature is covered in gore when we first see it, which without context is still kind of a scary image, but it's just like, oh, it's a monster covered in gore. But because of the earlier thing about the child chewing its way out of the corpse, that's in your head now as you see this gore covered creature, and so you're filling in gaps and making it even scarier in your head. Again, really good note about how the horror is pitched in this.
Anything else before we move on to speed through the last episode?
Um, the other thing I do like about this is that now to move completely away from the Conan history, if it were, um, Geralt does not win this fight by sheer strength. In fact, two things happen. One is intelligent. This is all part of a plan. He was trying to just fight it down till dawn, so the sunlight will hit it, which means it was a cunning. It was a trap, and we don't quite know that right off the bat. But the other thing is also he fucks up. He doesn't quite get it right, and we see that Geralt is flawed and makes mistakes. And it does mean that we have a bit of Triss. Basically, all she does is info dump and mend, so that's a little annoying. Triss gets a little marginalized as a result of that. But she also correctly points out, it's like, if you do this on your own, you're gonna get killed. And he kind of blows it off, and that leads to the is all about monsters and coin. So he recognizes that this is his role in life. But again, like the outsider in noir, the outsider in westerns, he can't. He must be alone because he can't do his job if he is part of a family, which hilariously gets completely undone by the actual show. But we're not there.
All right. Season 1, episode 5. I'm going to wrap up Ciri's story at the very start just so we can get that out of the way. It's really
Okay.
what it boils down to. We open on a creepy dude collecting body parts, and then the Nilfgaardian officer who originally captured Ciri is in the room with him. We find out the dude is a doppelganger. Baldur's Gate, baby. Doppelgangers rule. Who is taking over a new body, but the Nilfgaardian wants him to do it to a new person, and he takes the new person to meet with the Nilfgaardians who have captured the mage Mousak and kept him in a deuterium cell that neutralizes all the wizard's power. The doppelganger assumes his disguise and gains his full knowledge and clothes. He gained his clothes in the chains this time. I'm not sure
Somehow.
how that worked, but he did.
Magic.
We'll flash the end of the episode quickly. Ciri has found a little community of people, of elves she's hanging out with and protecting her. Doppelganger Mousak shows up and convinces Ciri and her little elfin friend to leave, and that's how they end. She's back with the Nilfgaardian doppelganger mouse sack as the episode ends. Meh.
Right.
Anything about
And
any of that?
one thing I'll say is that at this point I was getting a little tired of this because there were 5 episodes in and she still hasn't even met. They made allusions that she's supposed to eventually meet the Witcher. The Witcher's supposed to meet her. Everyone keeps saying, "Destiny, Destiny, you're destined to meet with her," but it just hasn't fucking happened yet. And so it's just like, it felt like there's two different shows going on here, right? Um, Again, for all sticking at Game of Thrones, they did a really good job of making sure that all of these different subplots started touching on each other. And the one subplot we didn't really like, for lots of reasons, all the Danny stuff, is because it's so disconnected from everything else. That's another one of the many reasons why I didn't like that subplot, is because there's just this other shit going on that had nothing to do with anything else. And the Ciri one is kind of like, even though Yennefer technically is in the same boat, she's seeing characters we've seen in Gerald's frame.
Yeah.
So she at least feels connected to the world. This is just other stuff happening. And for an episode 5, and it still hasn't really touched on the major plot yet. So that's one of the reasons why I got a little frustrated with the Ciri plotline by this point.
I'm in much the same boat as you, and it goes back to series plot throughout this entire series is 2 weeks, and there isn't enough of it to make it engaging for that 2 week period, and they don't seem to know what to do with the character, and that's frustrating to me as a viewer.
Right. I will say in the books, her being with the elves is about the point that Gerald stumbles upon her, and then she explains how she got there. So I mean, that's so right about here is where it was all made up functionally. I mean, it was expanded on the original material, but ultimately it was all new material. And there were some good points in it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we talked about Queen Caliente; she was awesome. And the mouse sack becoming her someone important to her to then become someone who ends up betraying her because she's a doppelganger is an interesting arc. So it's not like it wasn't bereft of interest.
Yeah.
But it was just unconnected.
Yosker comes across Geralt in the woods and banters about how long it's been since they met, and talks about his current situation of losing his lady friend. We learn that Geralt can't sleep. The Witcher explains that he's looking for a djinn somewhere in the lake that'll grant him wishes to cure his sleeplessness. Josker thinks addressing the law of surprise and his destiny head on could be the answer. The pair banter back and forth. Then they accidentally release the djinn, and Josker breaks the bottle. Initially, it seems that Josker is Jim's master, but then he suddenly becomes seriously ill. Gerald seeks help from a nearby healer, the elf Sindrin, but since they need a mage to help Josker, Sindrin reluctantly refers him to Yennefer. The medic can slow the process so the Witcher can go to her, but she's been imprisoned. I love Josker Eddy so much. It was so hard for me not to choose like episodes. I think it's 2 and 6, where he
Yeah.
is one of the main characters. Well, it's like no.
I admit, when I first saw the thing, I was like, is one of these Oscar ones? Like, no, that's episode 2, not episode 3. Oh, damn it. But, it did mean I didn't have to actually listen to recording of Witcher and play that scene 12 times in a row. So I guess there's that. But yes, again, talking before, I love Jaskier. And even this scene shows you what I was talking about, right? Is because Jaskier is just, he is the classic, slightly nervous non-adventurer who's completely gregarious to the taciturn badass hero. But at the same time, I love it because Gerald is clever, Gerald is cunning, but he is not up on the nuances of city living.
No.
And Jaskier is. And so they have a great balance. Plus, also, frankly, this show, something else Game of Thrones kind of got with Tyrion, is that sometimes you need just comic relief to balance all the grimdark. And with Tyrion, he was great because all that was tied to a character that we actually had very complicated growth and whatnot. But it sometimes meant that when Tyrion's would deepen his dramatic phase, other characters had to be somewhat witty to kind of fill in the balance, which is where Braun kind of comes in to help balance that out and whatnot. But Josker's kind of the comic relief explicitly. A lot of that is invested in Josker. And it really helps that he is a strong character in his own right. But it does not detract from the hilarity of them fighting over a bottle that he fished out of the river because Gerald can't go to sleep.
And it boils down to the fact that he is saying he's Gerald's friend, and Gerald refuses to admit it, and then insults his singing. And it's because of that that the bottle actually breaks and all this happens. Just because Gerald can't say that, yes, you're my friend.
Right, yeah. And that's something else. Again, this is where you see bits of the I mentioned before. The original stories are much more kind of fairy tale-ish. You see some of that here now, because they're very much Grimm's fairy tales. They're very dark. They're not like
Oh, yeah.
happy fun fairy tales, but they're much more the kind of magical things happen because people don't engage with themselves authentically kind of fairy tales. And so this is very much that subplot. Um, and also just little things like uh, Josker correctly pointing out, even in this scene, like, if you had just told me that the reason why you weren't sleeping is because a djinn punished you, I could have helped you. But you were an asshole about it because you don't know how people work. And now we're here. But again, on the flip side, when as much as Geralt was just heaping abuse on Josker, as soon as Josker got in trouble, Geralt immediately dropped everything and tries to help him.
Yep.
Even to go to fucking Yennefer. And it's like, all right, so to help my friends. So Geralt does not show affection, but he clearly makes very deep personal connections when he makes them.
Hmm.
And I love that.
Anything else before we move on?
No, because I want to get to the scene.
All right. Yin is on the run and living under the radar, helping folks with mechanical issues while seeking a cure for herself. I want to pause for a beat before I read on to say that if you remember episode 3 that we watched, Ostrid said that he got the curse and things from a wizard on the run from the Brotherhood. Jennifer's on the run from the Brotherhood. Tess
Oh,
comes
you're
to Jennifer
right.
trying to bring her back into the fold, but refuses to state again, refuses to come back to her because again states that she wants everything. The other maids teleports away through a mirror as Gerald brings a dying Josker to town looking for her and discovers a bewitched, very naked mare. And the two stumble into a very horny, mind controlled party with Yennefer at the center. The pair meet for the first time, and we get very sexy banter between the witch and the witcher. The witcher's offered to pay her whatever price she wants if she fixes the bard. She forces him to bathe, and the pair bond over past tragedy. Over the bard's body, Geralt admits he said things to him that weren't true, and he doesn't want it to end like this. He is his friend, although Yen cures Yosker. She plans to use him to capture the djinn and force it to grant her a wish to regain her fertility. The Witcher decides to take Yosker, but the healing spell won't work if he moves him. Yen eventually enters the Witcher's mind, trapping him. I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing.
Okay.
Cyrodiil, the elven medic from earlier, wakes Gerald, who, and both of them are in prison because it finds out Gerald was controlled, attacked people non-lethally in town, spanking some of them, and etc., who are on the town council. Back with Yin, Yosker awakens and is instantly afraid of her. She sits on the end of the bed. She threatens him to make a wish or else, while a chained Geralt is being beaten in prison by a guard. We learn that the djinn is in fact attached to Geralt, who wishes the guard dead, and his head explodes in the best scene ever. Geralt realizes that the djinn will kill Yennefer and rushes to save her. She needs him to use his wish so she can absorb the djinn. Instead, he uses his third and final wish to save her. But the wish itself is never revealed. The djinn leaves, now free and safe. Yin asks what was his third wish, but instead they have sex and falls asleep, and him never telling her. Bard and Medic look on through the window like peeping toms.
Okay, so first of all, again, unlike Game of Thrones, using a sex scene also as a comedic relief beat is
Love
genius.
it.
Because yes, it's
Well,
a sex scene. It's one of the most explicit sex scenes we've seen,
yeah.
right? And yet it's leavened with the two sub characters watching them through the window is just hysterical.
And you have the medic trying to pull the bard away. He's like, just give me one more minute. Like,
Right, right,
beautiful timing, beautifully done. Hot people doing what hot people do. Perfect.
right. But to go back to the chunk of this, again, this whole episode is actually really funny, because like you mentioned, basically her giving magical Viagra to the couple team, and then they come in to try to arrest her, and in the middle of this, you see a guy with this gigantic boner trying to hide it during the serious scene of arresting Yennefer.
He's not trying to hide it.
His
His
wife is
wife is
sorry,
trying to hide it for him,
yes, sorry, right, my apology,
which
and
in of
it's
itself,
gigantic.
but like that's a solid relationship beat though, that like the wife is trying to do it so he won't be embarrassed. Like that's
Yeah,
a
yes.
relationship dynamic for two off characters that are on screen for maybe 2 minutes.
Right. So sex is a huge part of this whole episode, and yet those 2 points, like there's always something else going on. The sex is serving a purpose. Even the part where the horny mind control party, right? One of the more gratuitous chunks of the show, but even then, uh, Yennefer's not part of it. She's not getting benefit out of it, so she's doing it just to kind of make the Witcher uncomfortable. That's clearly what's happening here. She's like, I'm going to have all this sex going on.
Okay, I'm going to push back against that
Okay.
because it was going on before they showed up, before she knew they were showing up. And it links back, I think, to Yennefer having people applaud her and Isker while they're having sex. And in an earlier episode
Oh,
where Isker and her first meet, they're having sex. Like I think sex for her is something that I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it because I didn't think about it until now. But that is a large part of her character throughout, and it's her controlling it. It could go back to like her power and control thing that she has for the character arc, but it's constantly part of her.
well, okay. That's a fair shout, and I certainly grant that. Her relationship with sex is very complicated and weird, and arguably, even when they were watching her and Geralt having sex, didn't bother her because like I'm used to this. Um, However, I do still feel like when he shows up and they start parting for him, she doesn't stop. She keeps the whole thing going during the conversation. So I still think it's still an attempt to try to get some kind of power or at least make Gerald uncomfortable. And the fact that he just no sells it. He's just like, whatever, I don't care. Um, and you can see that gets under her because she's clearly trying to play the mysterious, sexy woman, and he's just not buying it. And she gets a little frustrated near the end of that conversation, and she's like, "Fine, just stop." And then she stops the whole orgy. Um,
Before that, though, remember that it's even funny then because there's like a naked woman and Yasker like the throat popped out, is like staring like what, where the fuck
yes,
are we? What's going on? So it's humor infused already in it. So that's
right, and then the safe words, the fact that the magic meditation ties to the safe word culture, which is hilarious. So like, I forget what was this one that used kumquat or whatever, but like
yeah, the couple did. That was her word for it, and because
right,
she
right.
said you came up with that word really fast.
I forget which word she used for the scene with Gerald, but the point is like it's a silly word to end this scene. So yeah, so what's happening is that this and even then, like kind of like with the first episode, except for the times we cut to Josker, we're not really getting a close up of the action. It's kind of just happening around. The focus of it is on Geralt, where he's framed by the orgy, and with Jennifer, none the orgy's all in front of her. So when we cut to her, we don't see any of it around her specifically. So it's not lingering on it. It's not emphasizing it. It's just the background to this conversation they're having. And so cutting to Yasker, who's in the midst of this, is more hilarious because now it's oh god, naked people, and he's trying to do stuff in the middle of it. Which so even though occasionally the sex gets a bit much for me, um, it's always done in the service of the plot. And I've always felt that if you're going to have it, as long as it's doing something else beyond just being a sex scene on screen, then it's fine. And consistently, The Witcher uses nudity and sex for the purposes of the story.
Mm-hmm. No, it's I all right. So I loved. As someone that enjoys seeing the human form, I loved it. I like it in hard or soft core, whichever one you prefer to do it
Hmm.
here. But I like the fact that The Witcher normalizes it so much, and it's just part of life and existence, which it is. Which is a great layer to put on because then you're putting all the fantasy stuff on top of it, and that's not the focus. It's about the Jinn and trying to cure his friend Yasker of anything else. That's all Gerald cared about.
Yeah.
And you get that so much that he is so focused that Yennefer has been trying to invade his mind this whole time until she finally succeeds in doing it.
Right.
So she, playing all these games, has been doing something totally on the side. She's a chess master, and we're getting to see her constantly winning in these things that she's trying to do.
Right. And what makes her and Geralt an interesting pairing, because they're obviously going for their rivals, but also have affection there, is that Gerald is just as clever, but he realizes the best way to shortcut these things is to blunt through them. So one thing on a rewatch I noticed is since the Jin escapes, he is trying as quickly as possible to rid himself of obligations.
Yeah.
Let me pay for the bar that broke. Uh, how can we get him fixed? Let me pay you. Um, you have to bathe. Okay, is that the payment? Fine, I'll go bathe. Um, and because it's the if I let this linger, I give you more room to manipulate me. But if I keep paying off as fast as possible, I'm cutting off avenues for you to get your hooks into me.
Yeah.
And so you see Yennefer trying to spin things around him, and he's just going, "Cool, done." There's no room for her to elaborate or manipulate because he just goes, "Sure, whatever, just fucking do it. Fix this guy right now." And so again, like the fact that and again, perfect comedic timing. Gerald's surrounded by naked people, looks over his shoulder, sees them all, looks back at her, says, "Here's the money for the bar." So good.
Oh. Okay. Closing thoughts. Anything else on the first season of The Witcher?
One more thing about this episode I forgot to mention real quick. Where I was going originally. The other thing I find fascinating about the Jaskier, Gerald Yennefer relationship is that Jaskier and Gerald are the two people that she cannot easily seduce, but for completely different reasons. Jaskier is terrified of her and therefore cannot have sex with her. And Gerald is too busy focused on getting his job done. So so when they actually do have sex, even though they've only been on screen for a thing, it also helps that those two characters have amazing fucking chemistry. We've talked a lot about the importance of chemistry, but all three of them have chemistry with each other. So that sex scene at the end is very much earned. But I found it interesting that this is a woman who very much uses sex as a means of power because sex cannot be a means for family propagation, as we've established. So sex is now purely a tool for her to use. And it's a tool that does not work against two men, but they're for so completely different reasons. Because when she tries to seduce Yasker, he's like, up, just too scared of you. I gotta go. He's literally trying to get away from her. And he's just so confused by the whole situation. Again, it's hilarious, but also it establishes like, I tried to use sex in this guy, it didn't work. I tried to use this sex guy, and this sex in this guy, it didn't work. Fine, I guess I'll just remove the thing and try to implant the thing in me. Um, so yeah, anyway, it's points. There's a lot of interesting character stuff that's happening here. That's balanced with comedy. That's balanced, very sex positive writing and production. Fantastic chemistry, fantastic acting, and it's just a shame that soon after this, the whole thing kind of again. This is the good part. After this, it gets muddy, and then season two has problems. It's rougher after this, which is a shame because this is the point in the show where I was like, I'm in. I love the show. I want to support it, and then it just kind of goes downhill after this.
I could see a lot of that. The next episode is also a good one because it's the one with the dragon, if memory serves.
Oh,
And that's
okay,
a
yeah.
nice beat too because it gives us more insight into Geralt, and it's not Gerald just knowing it because he's on an exploration with someone, and it's someone who's tricking him to find out if he's a good person.
Honestly, I think I may just need to watch this again because I may be confusing seasons 1 and 2 in my head a little bit. Maybe it may just be I liked all of season 1, and
Because
then
I think
season
most
2
of
is where
season
it
one
bothered
is
me.
good. because it builds up on itself. Like each episode, I think gets a little progressively better. And season 2, I think, starts okay, but then starts getting really rocky towards the end. And season 3 was just kind of a hot mess because they're trying to piece stuff together. But it is
Right.
so sad because this had so much potential, and I loved it when I first saw it. And even now, when I'm rewatching it, I'm giddy talking about it because that's how good it was.
Yeah. No. This is because, like I said, like, we watched Game of Thrones and then we watched this. I remember liking this a lot more. Now that we talked it through, I'm seeing much more why, because I think this is the show I wanted Game of Thrones to be in a lot of ways. But
Yeah.
also, uh, uh, even though I keep thinking about it being muddy, the fact is that the Geralt specific storylines are still nicely episodic. You know, there's the episode where he kills the princess. There's the episode where he kills Astraga. There's the episode where he fucks up Josker accidentally. You know, each of these can be kind of compartmentalized, and I feel like that episodic core is the thing that people still remember from the show. 'Cause certainly when I was coming back, it's like, oh, this is the thing where that happens. Oh, and I guess series in this too. Like I hardly remembered any of the series stuff. And I remember the infrastructure because at the time I was mad. Although I admit, talking through, I feel like I'm warmed a bit more to that than I think I did the first time. I think the first time I was just the kind of natural reaction of like, ugh, I don't like the feeling of that. But I think I'm warmed a bit more to it. Um,
And but it's episodic with a constant chain of events that impact future actions. Because while in the first episode he kills the princess, the second in the one other one we watch, he saves the princess because of the actions in the first episode. So
right,
it shows that there are consequences for actions, and the characters are learning things as they go through, which is
right,
what you want in a series, which makes episodic television great as long as your characters are learning something and growing.
right. And also like we need episode 2 where Jaskier is convinced that he needs to make the Witcher a hero, even though Gerald's very much against that. Now, this episode where Gerald acts more like a hero as a result.
Mm-hmm.
That is important progression, even though this is the funny episode with Jin. He would, if he had not met, or if he not had the previous adventure with Josker, he would not have done all of this, right?
Well, also, if he hadn't had the previous adventure with Josker, in the third episode, he wouldn't have learned about the other Witcher in Temeria because the woman who he has relations with talks about the bard who sang his things, which is why
Right.
she's there with him having a conversation. So, like rippling impacts of actions. It's beautiful. It is what I
Yeah, yeah.
love about writing.
Right, exactly. This is the very much the braided novel approach, is that each one feels separate, but also it does tie to previous events, so it all feels organic and lived in. So yeah, I'm with you. Like when I first saw this first season, I was like, I'm really like the show, and I was nervous watching it back because I didn't think I was gonna like it as much, and I liked it more than I did the first time around, actually. So I'm a bit nervous, but I think I'm probably actually gonna rewatch this and maybe even give season 2 another try. Um, but again, like this was much like Game of Thrones, like the Netflix has tried to turn this into a franchise, and so there's this show, there's a couple of prequels, there's some animated movies, there's a whole world of The Witcher page now on
So I
Netflix.
know that we keep comparing it to Game of Thrones, but if I think about the story itself, it compares more to Legend of the Seeker.
Yeah, no, I mean in terms of structure, you're right.
And characters and things like that, because you have three main characters in Legend of Seeker, and this you really have three main characters and sword wielding dude, mystic woman, super powerful third character that doesn't do a lot but's hinted to be more powerful, super powerful character hinted to be more powerful than the other that doesn't do a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, now I'm imagining a world of what would happen if the Good Kind books were adapted by Netflix in 2019 as opposed to in 2008. What would that show look like?
I think their Legend of the Seeker would have looked a lot like The Witcher, and it would have been a
Yeah.
good show. I don't think it would have been as good as this, but
No.
it would have still been a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I can certainly see that.
Because Legend of the Seeker, I will go back and say, is a horny show that could not do anything with it.
Well, that's why I'm wondering, because like it's so clear that like if they could have shown the kind of sex they want here, it would have been, I think, a much fuckier than it was. You know, because you're right, they're walking right up to the line of horniness on that show.
Those Agiles would have had a whole set of other uses. Eddie, do you have any closing thoughts on The Witcher?
Um, this is one of the rare shows that it has encouraged me to. I may actually, I say, go back and rewatch it because um, I actually appreciate it slightly more on a rewatch, and even more after talking with you about it. This is like you. This is one of the few. I think it's probably the of the list you'd given me, or we'd worked it together. This is one of the ones like I know I like this show. The other ones were like, we'll see how it goes. Um, I'm glad we got a chance to get into it. So what's next? What other fantasy show are we going to look at after this, Chris?
We're going to go and cover the Willow show that we cannot find on Disney Plus, have been totally stripped from existence.
Can't. It's gone. Never see it again.
All right. So, in actuality, we're at the middle point for our fantasy run, and we're going to take a little break because, for one, we like taking breaks now, and for two, I didn't know how this run was going to go because a lot of shit me just pulling shows out of the ether, and
Yep.
I figured we'd want to recharge. And so, after The Witcher, though, I'm inclined to move on with more fantasy because I'm so jazzed. But intermission, we're going to do a Cornetto intermission.
Yes.
So not only are we going to cover the trilogy, but we're going to touch back to where it all started with Spaced. So we're going to cover Space Season 1, Episode 1, Beginnings, Spaced Season 1, Episode 4, Battles, Space Season 1, Episode 5, Chaos, and Space Episode Season 1, Episode 7, Endings. You'll notice that when I do them, I stick all within one season because I feel that it builds the momentum, even in like a 25-minute comedy show.
Right. Do you want to explain the Cornetto reference here, or do you want to save that for the next episode?
I think that we save it for the next episode, or we save it for the episode after that when it would make more sense.
Well, yes, but because it's Space kind of Cornetto prelude to the actual Cornetto trilogy.
Yeah. And I think our 15 listeners know what it is.
I didn't know it was even called this until you first picked it.
What?
Honestly.
You live over there. This is your television. You are now one of them. You should know this, Eddie. This is basic 101 Britophile knowledge.
I mean, I know what a Cornetto is. I know that these movies existed. I did not realize that they were called this and for the reason why they were called this. But I may buy a Cornetto and eat it in front of you now just because.
Since we didn't do it last week, maybe we'll start doing it sporadically. Eddie, if people are looking to find you in person or to buy your stuff online, which I think one of those is safer than the other, where could they do one of those two things?
Well, if you want to find me in person, good luck. I live in London, so that's a pretty big place to search. But if you want to find me online to buy my stuff, best place to do that is pugsteady.com. That's my website. We also lead you to my creator-owned game, Realms of Pugmire, at realmsofpugmire.com. Or you could find me on the Darker Hue Discord, where we'd love to chat about all sorts of random stuff. How about you?
If you're looking for me, you can find me to chat with me in the Dark Hue Discord, where I'm not posting memes right now. I'm posting articles about the burning of the U.S. But if you want to do something fun, you could come to my website, darkhuestudios.com, and buy my books so that I can afford to move to another country.
Like the UK, where I live.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, we'll talk to you next time when we start watching Spaced.
Ghost.